So I got a Nintendo Switch 2, just like many of you that are out there. But when it comes down to it, there are some things that I want to go ahead and say. First, this unit was not sent to be by Nintendo. No, this is not a paid video review by Nintendo. In fact, this isn't even really a review, so to speak. This is more of an impressions video. I've only had this for a couple of days, and I know that there are other content creators that have gotten their videos out when talking about the Switch 2, but I was actually using it with my family. We were actually playing games and just spending time together as a family. In fact, I was having so much fun that my son looked at me and said, "Dad, aren't you going to make a video about this to post on your YouTube channel?" So here we are. Before we get deeper into the video, I do want to give a shout out to my mother-in-law. It's because of her that I even have a Nintendo Switch 2. She went and actually pre-ordered it under her name and had it reserved. And then when I went to go pick it up with her, she canceled it. And the guy over at the store was kind enough to go ahead and sell it to me under my name. So, bardzo dziękuję, Bunia. I will go ahead and say that because this is a European unit, I did run into some problems whenever I was claiming the Mario Kart World code that came in the bundle. First, because it's region locked, I had to swap my account here to Europe in order for me to actually get it to work. When I did try to claim it without swapping the regions, it did go ahead and say that this game hasn't been released yet, which was super weird. Then I swapped it back and there was just a bunch of problems with my Nintendo Switch account. And then on top of that, in order to actually get things to work, I had to deregister a Nintendo Switch that I do not have on hand at the moment. It's actually in a different continent. So yeah, it was just not the easiest experience ever to set up a console, a brand new console, while you're traveling, especially when some of the games that you have are now key cards. It was just not the easiest situation ever. But I digress. That being said, I do want to go ahead and say that the Nintendo Switch 2 in many ways feels like the Nintendo Switch Pro that was supposed to, or rumored to, come out in 2020 and 2021. Obviously, around that time, there was this huge global thing that was going on that completely destroyed the distribution as we know it. But when it comes down to it, whenever I put a Switch 1 game into the Switch 2, things just run better overall. And I think that's what most people want. They want an experience where things just run better. I was primarily looking at games like Bayonetta 3, for instance, and I'll talk a little bit more about the other games later on in the video. But Bayonetta 3, whenever you were doing those kaiju fights, they did not run well at all. They were choppy as heck. But on the Switch 2, it was running at 60 FPS. Obviously, the textures that are there are there. There's nothing that you can really do too much about that. And the resolution of the game, either handheld or on the docked mode, just it is what it is. But the frame rate was definitely there. And I think that's something that will just remain consistently as you talk about Switch 1 games running on the Switch 2. They just run better overall. We do know that Switch 1 games are technically emulated on the Nintendo Switch 2, which I think is kind of ironic how Nintendo's stance on emulation is what it is, but that's a whole different video entirely. I will say that the experience of running those games on here is phenomenal. Now, the specs that you do see on screen, those are kind of like the main things that are there. Development for the Nintendo Switch 2 actually started out in 2019, so a lot of the specs that are here kind of changed as development went. The processor that is inside and the GPU that is inside was finalized in 2022. So here we have tech that is 2.5, maybe 3 years old, which is kind of Nintendo's MO to begin with. So using underpowered and undervolted hardware in order to actually make the software shine as best as it can. Now, I will go ahead and say that availability is obviously non-existent as of right now, but at $449 and $499 USD, depending on which package you go for, I feel like is reasonable given what you can do with this handheld. I know a lot of people are not happy with the video game prices that are out there. Looking at Mario Kart World, for instance, that's $80. But I will say that Expedition 33 has shown me that there are developers and publishers that are willing to price things at a more reasonable price and sell really, really, really well. The $80 and $70 price point, I think, is really more geared towards first-party titles, and I still think that there are going to be some instances where some games, even first-party from Nintendo, are going to sell at $50, $60, or even $70. Not everything is going to be $80 right out of the gate. So unboxing the Nintendo Switch 2 was actually pretty awesome. When you first open it up, you see the unit itself and then two Nintendo Switch JoyCon 2s, I think they're called. Yeah, Nintendo Switch JoyCon 2s. So, you have the two JoyCon 2s, and then underneath that, you have your dock as well as a USB-C to USB-C cable for charging with a power adapter and an HDMI cable alongside with two of these little guys that are here to connect onto Joy-Cons. Now, when you connect these on, they're actually pretty seamless. All you got to do is essentially you start from the bottom and then boom, you can go ahead and connect it. So it's pretty easy to go ahead and use. And it's not really a magnet. It's more of a clip. And there's actually a little tiny part at the top that comes off when you actually start to remove it. You can use the same button that you use to remove the Joy-Con 2s from the magnet slots that are there for the system. And it just, boop, just pops right off, which is pretty awesome. Now, on the right Joy-Con, you still have your home button as well as your new game chat button, which I haven't messed around too much with it. And then on the left Joy-Con, you still have that capture button for capturing either screenshots or video, and it's pretty seamless. If you did go ahead and transfer all of your data from one Switch to the other one, then all of your screenshots and video data are there, which was really great for actually seeing the difference between the screens, which I'll get into later on in the video. But I digress. Overall, the layout of the system is pretty awesome. Now, I will say that one of the biggest things that, I don't know, kind of disappointed me was the fact that the technology that they're using in the joysticks are still the same potentiometer ones. And what I mean by that, if you don't know, is that they're prone to drift. And that's something that Nintendo has already gone out of their way to say that if you do experience any sort of drift with your Joy-Con 2s, that they will go ahead and replace it for you for free. I'm guessing that's to, avoid any sort of class action lawsuit. Now, I do wish that they would have just, used Hall sensing or TMR joysticks, because technology has improved so much since the original Switch came out that it would have just been great to just have it right out of the gate. I don't think that the cost difference is that fast. Now, I will go ahead and say that the overall layout of the system is pretty, I guess, almost the same in some instances, but different in others. For example, if you're looking at the bottom of the unit itself, you have your USB-C port, which is also what you use to connect to the dock, as well as two air intake vents. And then if you pop open the stand, underneath you have a micro SD card express slot. Now, I will say that you can use a regular micro SD card. You don't need the express one if you're going to be playing only Switch 1 games. But if you want to store Switch 2 games onto that card, you do need to use the micro SD express card. That's just because of the speeds that are there. It just allows for loading to go ahead and happen. But I will say that I did put in this card after I set up my Nintendo Switch 2. And when I did that, it automatically asked for me to go ahead and update the system. My assumption is that it pretty much took the card that was there, it formatted it, and got it set up for me to go ahead and have Switch 2 games installed onto that card itself. If we're looking at the top of the unit, the new and improved game card slot is actually pretty awesome. I really like it because it feels very, very secure in contrast to the one that was on the Switch V1 and V2, as well as the Nintendo Switch OLED. There is a microphone that is here, and the microphones that are set up on this system are actually set up twofold. One is to go ahead and record audio of whatever it is that's happening, and then the other one is to go ahead and actually cancel out audio. I will say that the technology that is inside, it reminds me a lot of NVIDIA Broadcast. So if you're a streamer or if you do any sort of recording with OBS or on your computer, then you're pretty familiar with NVIDIA Broadcast, and the noise cancellation that is in NVIDIA Broadcast is absolutely fantastic. I absolutely love it. I only use the one that's in OBS here because most of the time I'm not in loud scenarios or situations, but this is pretty awesome. I was testing it out, just having fun with my family, and we were having a Roomba run in the background, and it still cleaned it out. It was honestly pretty awesome. There's also a 3.5mm jack. Sweet. I loved wired audio, another USB-C port, an air exhaust vent, as well as a volume rocker and a power button. Now, I will say that overall, this just feels like a Switch Pro more than anything else, and I like it. I'm 100% fine with it. The 8-inch screen on the Nintendo Switch 2 is actually fantastic. Now, obviously, it's not OLED. We would have wanted an OLED screen, and I think that inevitably Nintendo is going to come out with an OLED version of the Switch 2 with the same visual specs, if not better. When I look at this, I'm primarily looking at the 120 hertz refresh rate, as well as the 7.9-inch, almost 8-inch screen. and also the fact that there's VRR. Technically, there's HDR10 that is going to be supported later on. It isn't there out of the box, as far as I can tell. Could be wrong, this is an impression video after all, but it does look really nice. I did do a quick comparison between this and my Nintendo Switch OLED that I have. There is definitely some color vibrancy difference between the two, and there is also some brightness difference between the two. The Nintendo Switch OLED is just simply brighter and more contrasty than the Nintendo Switch 2 screen. But I think that's just a byproduct of it being an OLED versus an LCD screen. Now, can you tell the difference between the two if they're not both next to each other? Probably not. You're probably not even going to notice. Most people won't. I edit photos and video for a living, so I look and stare at calibrated screens all the time. So I definitely notice the difference between the two, but when it comes down to it, you're probably not even going to be able to tell. Most people that buy this will probably buy it and be more than satisfied with what's here. Speaking of the screen, I do want to go ahead and say that if more AAA games, kind of like Cyberpunk 2077, focus at a 40 FPS cap or kind of target, it'll just look very smooth on a 120 hertz screen, kind of like how we have here on the Switch 2. You have that nice even divide and things just look very smooth. There's going to be less juddery, kind of stuttery images on things. Things are just going to look absolutely fantastic. And I think that at the end of the day, that's why there is a 120 hertz refresh rate screen on the Nintendo Switch. They realized that they couldn't hit 60 FPS out of the box, so they instead aimed for 40 and just got a better overall image on things with that 120 hertz refresh rate. The speakers on the Nintendo Switch 2 are actually extremely loud. I was actually really impressed with how loud they can get. Obviously, it's not as bassy as an MSI Claw by any means, but it's still loud enough to the point to where you could, I don't know, you don't have any issues hearing anything. They are a little tinny, but again, the size doesn't really, affect too much when it comes to the audio performance that's there. It's just really, really impressive.
NCPD will not let that go. Got another blackout in Santo Domingo. Netrunners are at it.
So one of the biggest things with this is that you can use a JoyCon 2 as a mouse, and you can also buy a Nintendo Switch 2 webcam in order to use for game chat. Now, I don't have those here, but I did use a regular webcam to see if I could get a video out using the USB dock, and nothing happened. I also tried the USB-C port at the top of the Nintendo Switch 2, and that did not work either. Now, I did use a cheapo Logitech mouse that my wife takes with her everywhere, and this didn't actually connect at all, and it did not work as a mouse for the Nintendo Switch 2 to just navigate through things, which kind of sucks because I wanted to go ahead and see if I could use third-party, just stuff that I had lying around to see if it could work, but unfortunately, that didn't work at all. Okay, but that's enough talking about the hardware. Let's talk a little bit about the software experience that I've had so far. Now, again, this isn't a full-on review because I think that software requires a little bit more time to kind of like poke and prod and see what we can go ahead and get, as well as kind of like battery life and things like that. But when it comes to the experience on the Nintendo Switch 2, one of the biggest things that I saw was the improvement on the eShop. It's just so much snappier than the original eShop. Like, I'm in my in-laws' attic and the Wi-Fi access here is not the best. You've got literally walls to go through, but I'm still getting a decent enough experience on things, and the overall speeds that I'm getting on here isn't anything to call home about per se. Like, if I wanted to go ahead and test the system speeds, I could go ahead and come down over to the internet section, there it is, and test my internet connection speed just to go ahead and see what we have. And again, this is Wi-Fi. I'm not connected via Ethernet. Then this is in the attic with tons of material for that signal to go ahead and go through. This is what I'm having with this system. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of impressed. Like, I'm happy with this per se. Obviously, being closer to the router or being hardwired would be a better option. But overall, I'm not complaining when it comes down to things. I will say that I do like just the way that there's like a little bit more personality when you're actually looking at things through the applications, and just kind of having like those little jingles and noises and things like that. It just feels really, really awesome in contrast to what we have on the original Switch. Now, obviously, there were still, a couple of jingles and jangles that were there, but I don't know. This just feels, maybe it's a placebo effect. I don't know, but it feels totally and completely different than what I have seen with the original one. The only glitch that I found while using the software was actually just trying to adjust the size of the screen that's there. Now, when you're connected onto a dock onto a television, then you might have to adjust the screen size just so that everything looks decent. The only time that I ran into a glitch with that was when the HDR is enabled for the television and I tried to adjust the screen. When I did that, it would essentially just blow up the screen into a crazy proportion. And when I got back out from adjusting the screen size, it would stay at that crazy large size. The only way to actually get rid of that would be to remove the Nintendo Switch from the dock and put it back in. And then from there, I would have to just kind of be with whatever size was there. If I wanted to go ahead and adjust things, I would have to remove the HDR from the actual console in order for me to adjust the size appropriately. Even still, when I enabled HDR again, I would still run into the same problem. When I tried playing a couple of games, obviously, like I mentioned, I tried Bayonetta 3 and it ran really well. There were a couple of instances where it dipped below 60 frames per second, but for the most part, I didn't have to worry about anything. Now, I did also try Monster Hunter Stories 2 because that ran, well, honestly ran like crap on the original Nintendo Switch, with frames dipping into like the low 20s to like high teens. It was not a good experience. On the Nintendo Switch 2 though, 60 FPS almost the entire time. I mean, it's kind of crazy the difference between the two when you're talking about a Switch 1 game compared to a Switch 2 emulation of the Switch 1 game. It was just absolutely fantastic. I did play a little bit of Cyberpunk 2077 just so that I could go ahead and see the performance between the two. If you do have a save file on PC, you can go ahead and actually connect your cloud save onto this so you can play on the go, or pretty much any other console. I mean, I think the cross save is compatible across all of the platforms, so it is a nice to have. If you have a PlayStation, for instance, or an Xbox, you can go ahead and take that save file, get it onto the Switch 2, and keep on playing there. Also, there's a nice little nifty feature where you can use some of the JoyCon features that are there on this copy that is really, really awesome. Another game that I did want to go ahead and try out was Metroid Prime Remastered, because I love Metroid, and that experience there was absolutely fantastic. It ran well. Like I didn't have any issues at all when it came down to it. Now, I did also get the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and honestly, initial impressions, absolutely fantastic. The D-pad has a beautiful pivot to it. I didn't have too many issues with it. The face buttons are very responsive, and the analog sticks are just so much better than on the original Switch Pro controller. There's almost kind of like this soft dampening at the outer edges, the outer ring of the analog sticks that feel fantastic. I do like the GR and GL that is on the bottom, that if you wanted to go ahead and program different buttons to go ahead and go off with that, you can. And apparently the faceplate for the Switch 2 Pro controller is very easy to remove, so you can customize that however you want. Overall, it feels great, but you know, I need a little bit more time to get used to it and kind of get acclimated with the Switch 2 Pro controller before I can go ahead and start, saying anything about it. I'll probably talk about that in an actual video review. But I will say that overall, this experience, I mean, the Nintendo Switch 2 and the dock that's there, it's fine. It does the job. I like the fact that there is an Ethernet port built right into the Switch 2 dock, especially after what we saw with the Switch Pro. That should have been standard right out of the gate. And I do like the fact that there is just more options for connectivity in order to actually get games running. One thing that I will go ahead and say is that connecting this to a TV, getting it up and running, and just starting to play games is very easy and simple to do. My family and I, we experienced that firsthand. But I will say that this really feels like a Switch Pro. Like I've said it before, and the reason why I say that is because when you first boot it up for the first time, you're just like, okay, this is the Switch 2, and it feels very much familiar in many ways and in many fronts. Is that a bad thing? No, because if you're coming from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, there's a level of familiarity that's there. The thing is that, like, it feels like a natural evolution to what's there. It isn't, bringing anything crazily new to the table. It feels like it's and I keep on looking at it from like the side, but it keeps like, aside from like the actual little mouse tracking that is here and the magnets, it's just an overall improved evolution of this handheld, and I can't really complain because of that. Like it took what was good, polished it up, made it better, added more power. Battery life, I would have to actually do some more deep testing in order to actually really see how good the battery is on this. But overall, like I can't complain. It does the job and it does it well. Aside from Mario Kart World, Cyberpunk 2077, and the Welcome Tour, I really haven't played too many other Nintendo Switch 2 titles. I did play a little bit of the Tears of the Kingdom update, which ran absolutely fantastic on the Nintendo Switch 2. I was really impressed by it. But aside from that, I haven't really done much. As I'm gathering more data for an upcoming Nintendo Switch 2 video review, I'd love to hear what it is that you guys want to go ahead and learn about. What are you curious about? What is it that you want me to poke and prod on when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2? Let me know down in the comments because I read everything that pops up on this channel anyways. And if you want to hear more stuff, more Nintendo things that I've done on this channel, then click any of these videos over here. I'll go ahead and I'll update them as more Nintendo Switch 2 stuff pops up. But until next time, guys, I will see you on the next one. Peace.